The day I had waited so long for had finally arrived. My heart skipped a beat as I stood in front of the mirror and admired my wedding dress one last time. It was beautiful, immaculate white, with delicate lace details running down the bodice and train. My fingers trembled slightly as I adjusted my veil, trying to calm my nerves. "Amelie, are you ready?" The soft voice of my best friend and maid of honor, Sophie, snapped me out of my reverie. "Yes, I think so," I replied, taking a deep breath. "How do I look?" Sophie leaned closer, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "You look absolutely gorgeous. Anthony will be dazzled." Anthony, my future husband. Just thinking about him made me smile. We had met 3 years ago, at a party with mutual friends. What had started as a simple conversation had turned into a deep connection, and now we were about to be joined together for life. The ride to the church was a whirlwind of emotions. The streets of Paris flashed before my eyes, but I could barely see them, too busy trying to control my breathing and remember my vows. When the car stopped in front of the imposing Notre Dame Cathedral, my heart skipped a beat. "The time has come," Sophie murmured as she shook my hand. "Are you ready?" I nodded, unable to speak. The car doors opened and I stepped out, greeted by a wave of murmurs of admiration from the guests waiting outside. The air was soft, infused with the scent of the flowers that decorated the entrance to the church. My father was waiting for me, proud and excited. He took my arm and together we made our way to the cathedral doors. The organ music announced my arrival and the doors opened wide. The interior of Notre Dame was impressive. Hundreds of candles flickered and their flames danced on the stained glass windows. The center aisle was strewn with white rose petals, leading directly to the altar where Antoine awaited me. Our eyes met and the world around me seemed to fade away. There he stood, magnificent in his black suit, his eyes full of love and admiration. Step by step, I made my way toward my future. The smiling faces of our friends and family turned as I passed, but I saw only Antoine. When I finally reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Antoine's. "You are sublime," Antoine murmured, without taking his eyes from mine. "You are sublime," Antoine murmured, without taking his eyes from mine. The priest begins the ceremony, his voice echoing in the silence of the cathedral. Everything seemed perfect, as in a dream. We exchanged wedding rings, our hands trembling with emotion. Then it was time for the vows. Antoine began, his strong, confident voice filling the space. "Amelie, since the day I met you, my life has taken on a whole new meaning. You are my best friend, my confidant, my love. I promise to love, cherish and support you in good times and bad. You are my soul mate and I am honored to become your husband." Tears welled up in my eyes as I prepared to say my vows. I opened my mouth, but before I could utter a word, a thud echoed through the church. Startled, I turned around and saw Francoise, Antoine's mother, suddenly rise from her seat in the front row. Her face was flushed with anger and her eyes flashed in my direction. A shiver ran down my spine as he pointed an accusing finger at me. "Stop everything," he shouted, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent cathedral. "I can't allow this farce to continue." The guests began to murmur, confused and surprised. Antoine squeezed my hand tighter, as surprised as I was. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked with disbelief piercing his voice. Francoise ignored her son, her eyes riveted on me with an intensity that made me take a step back. "That woman," she spat, pointing at me, "is nothing but a parasitic leech. She's only marrying you for your money, Antoine." The assembly let out a collective hiccup. I felt the blood drain from my face and my legs trembling. How could he say something like that? How could he ruin what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life? "Francoise." Antoine's father's voice rang out, a mixture of shock and reprimand. "That's enough." But Francoise was on a roll, her voice rising a tone. "Don't you see? She comes from a poor family, she has nothing, and suddenly she finds herself married to my son, heir to one of the biggest fortunes in France. It's too good to be true." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Each accusation was a stab in my heart. I looked around and saw the shocked faces of our guests, some of whom were beginning to whisper among themselves. The joyful atmosphere had turned into a nightmare in a matter of seconds. Antoine stood in front of me, as if to protect me. "Mom, have you gone crazy? How can you say such things?" But Francoise didn't stop. She advanced down the hallway, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "She manipulated you, my son. She seduced you for your money, nothing more. She's an upstart, an opportunist who only wants to get rich at our expense." I felt tears running down my cheeks, unable to hold them back any longer. How could she think that of me? How could she reduce all the love I felt for Antoine to a simple question of money? The priest, clearly uncomfortable, tried to intervene. Please calm down. We are in the house of God." But Francoise ignored him, continuing her tirade. "I've done some research on her. Her family lives in a small apartment in the suburbs, her father works in a factory and her mother is a cleaner. And what has she achieved? She hasn't achieved anything. She's just a freeloader who saw an opportunity and took it." Francoise's words echoed through the cathedral, bouncing off the stone walls and amplifying her cruelty. I felt the eyes of all the guests riveted on me, some full of pity, others of doubt. My dream was turning into a nightmare before my very eyes, and I felt powerless to stop it. Antoine turned to me and looked me in the eye. "Amélie, don't listen to him. I know who you are, I know your heart." Her words were like a lifeline in this sea of chaos, but I still felt overwhelmed by Francoise's accusations. How could I defend myself against such accusations without appearing even more guilty? It was then that I realized that there was silence in the assembly. Everyone was waiting for my reaction, my defense. I took a deep breath, trying to muster what little courage I had left. I had to speak, I had to stand up for myself, not only for myself, but for Antoine, for our love. I took a step forward, my trembling legs barely supporting me. Everyone's eyes were on me, waiting, judging. I felt the weight of their stares, the weight of Francoise's accusations. My voice was barely audible, broken with emotion. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I assure you this is all a misunderstanding." But Francoise wouldn't let me finish. "A misunderstanding? That's what all imposters say when they get caught." I felt something snap inside me. Anger, frustration, pain, all mixed together in a whirlwind of emotions. And suddenly I knew what I had to do. The truth, the whole truth, had to be revealed. No matter what the consequences, no matter what people thought. It was time to end this nightmare once and for all. As Francoise continued to spout her venom, I was overcome by a flood of memories. Each word she uttered brought back images of my past, moments I had tried to bury deep inside me. I saw myself again, sitting at the small kitchen table in our apartment in the Paris suburbs. The walls, yellowed by time and my father's cigarette smoke, seemed to close in on me. My mother, exhausted after a long day's work as a cleaner, was preparing a meager meal with the means at hand. "Amélie, my dear," she said, putting a plate in front of me, "eat well. You need strength for your studies." I looked down at my plate, grateful but embarrassed to see how my mother deprived herself for me. That night, like so many others, I heard her crying softly in her room, worried about not being able to make ends meet. The next memory hit me hard. I was 18 years old and had just been accepted to college. The joy of success was quickly overshadowed by the economic reality. How were we going to pay the tuition? "We'll figure it out," my father said, his calloused hands intertwined with mine. "We'll find a way." And we had found it. Or rather, I had found it. 3 jobs in addition to my studies. Waitress in the morning in a cafeteria near the university, tutor in the afternoon and night receptionist in a small hotel. The days were endless, the nights too short. I remembered sleepless nights studying, my eyes struggling to stay open as I reread my notes for the umpteenth time. The bitter taste of cheap coffee that kept me awake. The dark circles under my eyes, getting deeper and deeper. My classmates didn't understand. For them, college was a time of carefree fun, parties, and discovery. For me, it was a race against the clock, a constant struggle to stay afloat. "Why don't you ever come to parties?" my roommate Chloe would ask me. Her father was a lawyer and her mother a doctor. I didn't understand. "I have work to do," I would always reply, trying to ignore the pang I felt in my heart as I watched others live the student life of my dreams. Francois's words still echoed in the cathedral and brought me sharply back to the present. "You come from a poor family. You have nothing to offer, my son." I had heard those words so many times, in different ways, throughout my life. The condescending look on Chloe's mother's face when she found out my mother was a cleaner. The whispers from the other students when they found out I worked as a waitress. I remember one day in particular, during my second year at university. I was sitting in an elegant cafe in the 16th arrondissement, waiting for Chloe for a group assignment. An elegant woman, probably in her 50s, looked me up and down before saying to her daughter, "See, honey, that's why you have to work hard in school. Otherwise you'll end up like her, serving others all your life." I was overcome with shame and anger. I wanted to shout that I was a student, that I was striving to succeed. But the words stuck in my throat. Painful memories were crowding my mind as Francoise continued her diatribe. Each word she uttered rekindled a wound, reopened a scar I thought was closed. I remembered the nights when I would cry silently in bed, exhausted and discouraged. The times I had thought about giving up on my dreams and settling for a simple life like my parents. But I didn't. I held on, driven by a determination I didn't know I had. I remembered the small victories, the proud moments. The day I graduated, my parents' tears of joy. The first job in a big company, the first check that allowed me to take my parents on a trip. And then there was Antoine. Our meeting had been like a ray of sunshine after a long night. He had seen me, really seen me, beyond appearances, beyond my past. He had been charmed by my strength, my courage, my determination. I remembered our first date, in a small bistro in the Marais. I was nervous, aware of the difference in our social backgrounds. But Antoine had brushed aside my worries with a warm smile. "Tell me about yourself," he said, his eyes sparkling with genuine curiosity. And for the first time in my life, I had spoken openly about my journey, my struggles, my hopes. Antoine had listened to me, fascinated, without judgment. "You are extraordinary, Amélie," he said at the end of the evening. "You have achieved so much with so little. I admire you for that." Those words had been like a balm to my battered soul. For the first time, someone saw my struggle not as a defect, but as a strength. As Francois's accusations continued to rain down, I felt something change inside me. Shame and fear gave way to another emotion, pride. Pride in my accomplishments, in my sacrifices, in my success. Suddenly I realized that I no longer had to hide, no longer had to be ashamed of my origins. My past was not a burden, but a strength. Each trial had made me stronger and more resilient. Francois's words, which moments before had hurt me deeply, now seemed ridiculous and petty. How could I reduce my whole life, all my efforts, to a simple question of money? I felt Antoine's hand squeeze mine, bringing me back to the present. His gaze was full of love and support, giving me the strength I needed. I took a deep breath. The time had come. Time to tell the truth, the whole truth. Not just for me, but for all those who had been unfairly judged, who had to fight against prejudice and stereotypes. I took a step forward, gently releasing myself from Antoine's protective embrace. Silence had taken over the assembly, all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. "Mrs. Dubois," I began, my voice firmer than I would have thought possible, "you are right about one thing. I come from a modest background." A murmur ran through the room. Francoise smiled in satisfaction, probably thinking she had one. But she wasn't finished. "My parents are simple people, it's true. My father works in a factory and my mother is a cleaner. I was raised in a small apartment in the suburbs, with little money but a lot of love." I paused for a moment, looking around the room. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others intrigued. "What you don't know is that these modest origins have taught me values that all the money in the world can't buy. Hard work, perseverance, humility, compassion." I saw Francoise smile falter. It was clear that this was not the reaction I had expected. "I've worked hard to get where I am today. 3 jobs at the same time as my studies. Sleepless nights reviewing. Sacrifices you probably can't even imagine. My voice cracked slightly as I uttered these last words, emotion gripping me. But I recovered quickly. I'm proud of where I came from. Proud of my parents, who sacrificed everything so I could have a better life. Proud of all the obstacles I have overcome. I turned to Antoine, whose eyes were shining with pride and love. And I am proud of the love Antoine and I share. A love based on mutual respect, understanding, and admiration. Not on money or social status. I faced Francoise again, whose self-assurance seemed to have evaporated. So yes, Mrs. Dubois, I may not have grown up in a mansion or attended the best public schools. But I have something that money can't buy: integrity. A heavy silence fell over the cathedral. I could almost hear my heartbeat echoing in the immense nave. But then I realized that there was still more. There was still a truth to be revealed. A truth he had kept secret for so long, even from Antoine. A truth that would change everything. The silence in the cathedral was deafening. I felt all eyes fixed on me, some filled with compassion, others with curiosity, and some, like Francoise, with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. My hands trembled as I lifted them to adjust my veil. This gesture, so insignificant a few minutes ago, now seemed to carry immense weight. Because what I was about to reveal would change everything. I took a deep breath and looked to Antoine for support. His eyes, full of love and trust, gave me the strength I needed to continue. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice echoing in the silence of the cathedral. "Something I've kept secret for a long time. Even you, Antoine, don't know." I saw a glint of concern in her eyes, but she nodded, silently encouraging me to continue. "Madame Dubois," I said, turning to Francoise, "you accuse me of being interested only in your son's money. You think I am an upstart, an opportunist seeking social advancement. But the truth is quite different." I paused, letting my words sink in. The silence was palpable, charged with expectation. "The truth is that I am the heiress to a considerable fortune," she said. A murmur of surprise went through the assembly. I saw Francoise's eyes widen in astonishment. "My grandparents were Italian immigrants," I continued, my voice growing more confident. "They came to France with almost nothing, fleeing the poverty of post-war Italy. My grandfather, Enzo Rossi, was a brilliant, hard-working man. He started as a simple worker in a textile factory, saving every penny he could. I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell me when I was little, sitting on her lap in my parents' small apartment. Stories of courage, perseverance, and dreams that seemed impossible. Eventually, my grandfather managed to save enough money to buy a small sewing machine. He worked by day in the factory and by night in our small apartment, creating clothes that he sold at the local market on weekends. She could almost smell the fabric and hear the hum of the old sewing machine, childhood memories surfacing. Little by little, her work was noticed. Her creations were unique and combined Italian elegance with French fashion. She began to receive larger and larger orders. And one day, a Parisian department store offered to sell his creations. I saw Antoine smile, proud and moved. He knew part of the story, but not the rest. It was the beginning of an incredible rise. In just a few years, my grandfather's small company became a brand recognized throughout Europe. But Enzo Rossi never forgot his origins. He continued to live simply, reinvesting most of his profits in the company and in charity. I turned to my parents, sitting in the front row. Their eyes were filled with tears, a mixture of pride and emotion. My parents chose to follow the same path. They could have lived in luxury, enjoying the family fortune. But they chose to live simply, work hard and raise me with the same values that had made my grandfather successful. I paused to take in my words. I could see the confusion and disbelief on many faces, especially Francoise. When I was 18, my grandparents revealed to me the extent of our family fortune. I was shocked. All my life I had thought we were a modest family. Suddenly, I discovered I was the heiress to a fashion empire. I still remember that day. Shock, disbelief, and then fear. Fear of what it meant, fear of how it would change my life. My grandparents gave me a choice. I could take my share of the inheritance immediately, live a life of luxury if I wished. Or I could choose to continue living as usual, keeping our fortune a secret. I looked at Antoine, whose eyes would not leave me. I saw that he was beginning to understand. I chose to keep it a secret. Not out of shame or fear, but because I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to succeed with my work, not with my family's money. I turned to Francoise, whose face was now pale with astonishment. So yes, Madame Dubois, I worked as a waitress. I was a tutor. I spent sleepless nights studying. Not because I had no choice, but because it was my choice. Because I wanted to be worthy of my grandfather's legacy, not just in money, but in values. I took a few steps down the aisle, feeling the weight of my secret lifted from my shoulders. When I met Antoine, I knew it was him. Not because of his name or his fortune, but because of his heart. He loved me for who I was, not for what I had or didn't have. I turned to Antoine, whose eyes were shining with emotion. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, my love. I was afraid. Afraid that something would change between us. Afraid you would think I had lied to you. Antoine took a step toward me, taking my hands in his. Amélie, he said softly, this doesn't change how I feel about you. You are still the strong, brave, incredible woman I fell in love with. Her words warmed my heart, banishing the last traces of doubt and fear. I turned to the assembly. I know this revelation may seem shocking. Perhaps some of you may feel misled. But I assure you that it was never my intention to hurt anyone. I simply wanted to live my life my way, earning respect with my actions and not my bank account. I saw sympathetic nods among the guests. Even Francoise seemed to have lost her fighting spirit, her face now reflecting more confusion than anger. The truth is that money does not define who we are. It's our actions, our choices, the way we treat others that define us. And that's why I love your son, Mrs. Dubois. Not for his name or his fortune, but for the wonderful man he is. I felt Antoine's hand squeeze mine a little tighter. His silent support gave me strength to continue. I understand that this revelation may be difficult to accept. I am ready to answer all your questions, to prove to you that my intentions have always been pure. But know one thing, my love for Antoine is real, deep and unconditional. Nothing you say or do will change that. There was silence in the cathedral as I finished my speech. The faces around me showed a myriad of emotions, astonishment, disbelief, admiration, and even, for some, a beginning of understanding. Francoise, for her part, seemed to have lost all her verve. She remained motionless, her eyes wide open, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened. I turned to Antoine, looking into his eyes for some hint of what he thought about all this. His eyes were full of love and pride, silently assuring me that all would be well. Then a movement caught my attention. Someone was walking down the central nave of the cathedral. The silence of the cathedral was suddenly broken by the sound of footsteps on the marble floor. All eyes turned to the central nave, where the unexpected sound came from. To my surprise, I see Antoine moving forward with determination. His face was a mixture of emotions, love, pride, but also a hint of determination I had never seen before. He stopped halfway between the altar and the pews, where his mother, Francoise, was still standing with her mouth open. "Mama," he began, his loud, clear voice echoing throughout the cathedral, "I think it's time for me to say something." I felt my heart clench. What was he going to say? Was he angry that I hadn't told him the truth about my family? Was he going to call off the wedding? In a second 1,000 hypotheses ran through my head. Antoine turned to me, a reassuring smile on his lips, before facing the assembly. "What Amélie has just revealed is a shock to many of you, I am aware of that. For me it is too, but not for the reasons you might think." He paused, sweeping his gaze over the guests. "The shock for me is not learning that Amélie is the heiress to a great fortune. The shock is realizing how extraordinary the woman I love is." These words brought tears to my eyes. Antoine continued, "Think about it for a moment. Amélie could have lived a life of luxury without lifting a finger. She could have made the most of her fortune, lounged on paradisiacal beaches, indulged in everything she dreamed of. But what did he choose to do?" He turned to me, his eyes shining with admiration. "She chose to work hard. To make a living for herself. Build a career on merit, not on name or fortune. Antoine took a few steps toward his mother. Mom, you've accused her of being overbearing, of being a woman interested only in our money. But think for a moment. If that were really so, why would she hide her own fortune? Why would she have worked as a waitress, as a tutor, spent sleepless nights studying, when she could have lived in luxury? I saw Francoise lower her eyes, clearly uncomfortable. Antoine continued, the truth is that Amélie is one of the most honest, hard-working, and humble people I have ever met. And it was because of those qualities that I fell in love with her. He turned to me again, coming a few steps closer. Amélie, my love, there is something I must also confess to you. My heart leapt in my chest. What could I possibly have to confess? I already knew about your family, he said quietly. A murmur of surprise went through the assembly. How could I have known that? Antoine smiled at my confusion. About 6 months ago, I received a visit from an old man in my office. He introduced himself as Enzo Rossi, your grandfather. I put my hand to my mouth, stifling a hiccup of surprise. Had my grandfather gone to see Antoine? Why hadn't he told me? Your grandfather is an extraordinary man, Amélie, Antoine continued. He told me the story of your family, your decision to live simply despite your wealth. He told me how proud he was of you, of your choices, of your strength of character. Silent tears ran down my cheeks. I couldn't believe my grandfather had done this. He told me he wanted to make sure the man his granddaughter was going to marry was worthy of her. Anthony continued with a chuckle. I think I passed the hardest test of my life that day. The assembly laughed softly, breaking the tense atmosphere a bit. Your grandfather made me promise not to tell you, Antoine explained. I wanted you to have the chance to tell me yourself, when you were ready. And I so respect your integrity, your desire to prove yourself, that I agreed to keep it a secret. He took another step toward me, taking my hands in his. Amélie, knowing that you were the heiress to a great fortune has not changed my feelings for you at all. On the contrary, it has only strengthened my admiration and love for you. You could have had an easy life, but you chose the harder, more honorable path. I could feel the gazes of all the guests on us, but at that moment it was as if Antonio and I were alone in the world. I love you, Amélie, he said with an intensity that took my breath away. I love you for your strength, your integrity, your compassion. I love you for the woman you are, not for what you have or don't have. Then he turned to the assembly, holding one of my hands between his. If anyone present still thinks that Amélie is interested in money or social status, let them speak now. Otherwise, I propose that we continue with this ceremony and that I finally marry the extraordinary woman standing next to me. There was total silence for a few seconds, and suddenly the applause broke out. At first timid, then louder and louder, until the whole cathedral resounded with cheers and shouts of joy. I saw my parents stand up, tears in their eyes, applauding proudly. Even Antoine's father, who until then had remained silent, stood up to applaud, a broad smile on his face. Only Francoise remained seated, confused and a little embarrassed. But when the applause continued, I saw her slowly get up. She approached us with a blank stare. I'm sorry, he said in a voice barely audible above the sound of applause. I was wrong to judge you, Amélie. I hope you can forgive me. I felt a surge of relief and compassion. Without hesitation, I took Francoise in my arms. Of course I forgive you, I murmured. We're a family now. The applause redoubled at this sight. I felt Antoine wrap us both in an embrace, and for a moment everything seemed perfect. When we finally parted, the priest cleared his throat. Well, he said with a smile, I think we can resume the ceremony, if the bride and groom are ready. Antoine and I looked at each other, our eyes shining with love and happiness. We are more than ready, we replied with one voice. As we took our places at the altar, I couldn't help but think about how unexpected the day had turned out. What had begun as a nightmare had turned into something beautiful and powerful. The priest picked up the ceremony where we had left off, but this time every word seemed to have a deeper meaning. When it came time to exchange our vows, Antoine took my hands in his and locked his eyes on mine. Amélie, he began, his voice full of emotion, I promise to love and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to support you in your dreams and ambitions, to celebrate your successes and comfort you in difficult times. I promise to always be honest with you, to trust you and to earn your trust in return. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, and I am honored to become your husband." With tears in my eyes, I took a deep breath before pronouncing my vows. "Antoine, my love, I promise to love you unconditionally, in good times and bad. I promise to be your companion, your friend, your confidant. I promise to encourage you to pursue your passions, support you in your challenges, and laugh joyfully with you. You have accepted me as I am, with my past and my secrets, and I promise to always be truthful and honest with you. I am so grateful to have you in my life, and I am proud to become your wife." As we exchanged rings, I felt a surge of love and happiness come over me. Despite all the unexpected challenges and revelations of the day, there we were, stronger and more united than ever. When the priest finally pronounced us man and wife, the cathedral erupted again in applause and cheers. Antoine embraced me and kissed me passionately, sealing our union in front of everyone we knew. As we turned to the audience, holding hands, I couldn't help but smile at the beaming faces of our family and friends. Even Francoise had tears in her eyes and a sincere smile on her lips. That day had not gone as I had planned, but somehow it had turned into something even more beautiful and meaningful than I could have imagined. We had faced adversity together, we had revealed our deepest truths, and our love had only grown stronger. As we walked down the aisle under a shower of rose petals, I knew that whatever the future held for us, Antoine and I would be prepared to face it together, with honesty, love and courage. As we walked out of the cathedral to the applause and congratulations of our guests, I couldn't help but remember everything that had just happened. What had started out as a potential disaster had turned into a day filled with revelations, intense emotions and, ultimately, triumphant love. The reception that followed was a whirlwind of joy and celebration. The grand ballroom of the luxury hotel we had chosen for the occasion was beautifully decorated, with white flowers and gold ribbons everywhere. Music from the orchestra filled the air, mingling with the laughter and animated conversations of our guests. Antoine and I had just finished our first dance as husband and wife, and were making our way to our table when I saw Francoise approaching us. My heart skipped a beat and apprehension took hold of me, despite what had happened at the cathedral. "Amélie, Antoine," she said quietly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" We exchanged a quick glance with Antoine before nodding. Francoise led us to a quiet corner of the room, away from curious onlookers. "I wanted to apologize again," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "My behavior at the church was unforgivable. I got carried away by my prejudices and fears, and I was about to ruin the happiest day of your life." I felt Antoine's hand squeeze mine, giving me strength to respond. "Francoise," I said softly, "I understand that you wanted to protect your son. Even if your methods were, let's say, unconventional, your intention was good." Francoise shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, Amélie. There is no excuse for what I did. I judged without knowing, I accused without evidence. I let my own insecurities dictate my actions." He took a deep breath before continuing. "The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of losing my son, afraid that he no longer needed me. And instead of accepting that my little boy had become a man, capable of making his own decisions, I chose to attack the woman I loved. I was moved by her sincerity. It was the first time I had seen Francoise so vulnerable, so human. "Mom," Antoine interjected, "you will never lose me. Amélie is not a threat to our relationship, she's just another member of our family." Francoise nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I see it now. Amélie," he said, turning to me, "you are an extraordinary woman. Your strength, your integrity, your love for my son. I am honored to have you as my daughter-in-law. I hope that, in time, you will be able to forgive me and we can build a real relationship." Without hesitation, I took Francoise in my arms. "Of course I forgive you," I murmured. "We are a family now, and families support each other, even in difficult times." When we parted, I saw a sincere smile on Francoise's face. "Thank you, Amélie. I promise to do my best to be the mother-in-law you deserve." Antoine enveloped us both in a hug. "It's all I could hope for," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The two most important women in my life, at peace with each other." This moment was interrupted by the arrival of my parents. My father, normally so reserved, was beaming with pride. As for my mother, she couldn't hide her tears of joy. "Honey," my father said as he kissed me, "we are so proud of you. You have handled this situation with grace and dignity." My mother nodded, hugging Antoine. "You make a wonderful couple. Your love is an inspiration to everyone." It was then that I realized that this moment, this reconciliation, was much more than the resolution of a family conflict. It was a lesson for everyone present. I turned to our guests, who were watching our small group with curiosity. Taking a deep breath, I decided that the time had come to share this lesson with everyone. "My dear friends," I began, my voice carrying across the room, "I would like to say a few words, if I may." There was a gradual silence as all eyes turned to me. Today we all witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the union of two people who love each other, but the power of honesty, forgiveness, and unconditional love. I paused for a moment, looking around the room. I could see the attention and curiosity on everyone's faces. Just a few hours ago, we were on the brink of disaster. Prejudice, misunderstandings, and secrets threatened to destroy what should have been the happiest day of our lives. But something wonderful happened. We chose honesty over concealment. We choose forgiveness over resentment. And, above all, we choose love over fear. I felt Antoine squeeze my hand, silently encouraging me to continue. What we have experienced today is a lesson for all of us. A lesson about the importance of not judging others by appearances or hearsay. A lesson in the value of honesty, even when it is difficult. A lesson in the power of forgiveness and mutual understanding. I turned to Francoise, smiling warmly. "My new mother-in-law has shown us today that, even in the darkest moments, it is possible to find the light. That a mother's love can overcome prejudice and misunderstanding." Francoise had tears in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "And my husband," I continued, looking affectionately at Antoine, "taught me that true love goes beyond appearances, beyond secrets. That it accepts the other person as he or she is, with all his or her virtues and faults." Antoine brought my hand to his lips, depositing a soft kiss on it. Today we celebrate much more than a marriage. We celebrate the victory of love over fear, of truth over prejudice, of understanding over rash judgments. I raised my glass, inviting all the guests to do the same. I invite you all to reflect on this day, on what we have experienced and learned. May it serve as a reminder in our daily lives. Let us always remember to try to understand before we judge, to be honest even when it is difficult and, above all, to love unconditionally. A murmur of approval went through the assembly. I saw nods, smiles, and even a few tears of emotion. "Here's to," I concluded, "love, honesty and family, the one we have by blood and the one we choose. May our story serve as an inspiration and a reminder that love really can overcome all." "Here's to love," all the guests responded in chorus, raising their glasses. When the conversation resumed and the music began to play again, I felt a deep peace come over me. What had started out as the worst day of my life had turned into something beautiful and meaningful. Antoine hugged me and kissed me tenderly. "You're amazing," he whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too," I replied, snuggling up against him. As the evening continued, filled with dancing, laughter, and celebration, I couldn't help but think how amazing life can be. The trials we had been through today had made us stronger, more united. They had reminded us of the importance of honesty, forgiveness, and unconditional love. I knew that our life together would not always be easy. There would be challenges, disagreements, and even moments of doubt. But I also knew that as long as we kept in mind the lessons of that day, the importance of open communication, mutual understanding, and unconditional love, we could get through it all. As I looked around me, seeing the smiling faces of our friends and family, I was filled with gratitude. Gratitude for Antoine's love, for Francois' newfound understanding, for my parents' unwavering support, and for the opportunity to turn a potentially disastrous situation into a moment of learning and growth for all of us. This day, which had begun in chaos and confusion, ended in harmony and love. And as Antoine led me to the dance floor for another waltz, I knew that whatever the future held for us, we would face it together, stronger and more united than ever.